Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Needless to say, there's so much that's going on, so much that we're reading, so much that we're experiencing, so much that can make us perhaps feel a little bit pessimistic about what's going on with the Jewish people, with other people, or at the very least exhausted. And I wanted to start in a very positive place because I do want to speak about an approach that we can take that I believe is very Jewish, very human, and very positive. And the positive place that I want to take you to is my Tuesday evening youth house class where I teach our children. And we talk about a whole variety of issues and always grounded in Jewish texts and Jewish understanding. And so I said, you guys, how much have you been following about the whole issue of the book Mouse, the graphic novel that was taken out of the curriculum of a Tennessee school district? And they knew a lot about it. And they started sharing their views about it. First of all, just about all of them have read the book. It is not something which is necessarily required reading, but one of the students said that in her class, the teacher gave it as an option so that the students could choose that off of a list of options that would be an introduction to the Shoah, to issues surrounding the Holocaust. So most of them have read the book. A few observed that they found the book to be very provocative and to make them want to learn more and know more. One student said that while it's important for parents to share their views and their perspectives about what it is that their children are learning, that we really ought to provide the proper respect for teachers and their expertise and their capacity to determine what's appropriate in terms of curriculum, in terms of what they should be studying. I showed a video of Art Spiegelman being interviewed, the creator of Mouse. And it was a fascinating interview. It was actually conducted by two women who are connected with the Tennessee public school district that removed the book from the curriculum for the middle school. And they were distraught by what was done by the district, but they were asking him, how should teachers use this book if they use it? What do you feel about your book and others like it being removed from curriculum? And so he shared his views about the importance of exposing children appropriately, even to things that are disturbing. And then he actually showed a panel from the book, and he said something very interesting about it. So the panel from his book described a horrific scene where children in a ghetto were killed by Nazis. And the way that he depicted it, he said, was not lurid. You didn't actually see it in graphic detail. What you saw was the swinging of these children, but you didn't actually see the impact. And he said the effect was that when you look at it, you want to look more closely. He said that's ultimately what he wanted to do as an artist and as someone who was stepping into an educating role, to get students, and I would argue students of all ages, to look more closely. So I thought that was very powerful, and I wanted to reflect on the importance of looking more closely. A good educator, and I'm looking out here and I see among us people that I know are lifelong educators. A good educator wants children, adults, all ages that you're educating, to look more closely. You want to inspire them to want to know more, to want to deepen their connection. And I wonder sometimes when people are afraid of looking more closely, or of others looking more closely, what are they afraid of? What are they afraid that children and adults are going to see? Looking more closely is certainly important when it comes to the Shoah. Looking more closely is important when it comes to the depth, the reasons why the Shoah ultimately crystallized and was such a horrific tragedy. The horrors of the Shoah, important to look more closely and for children to look more closely. I would also say that it's important for people of all ages to look more closely at other events that have befallen other people, to look more closely at the effects of anti-Semitism and also racism and also misogyny and all of the horrors that have emerged in connection with all of these different forms of bigotry and hatred. Looking more closely is something that we should encourage people to do across the lifespan. If we're hiding something, maybe that's a problem. It's important to encourage people of all ages to look more closely. And as a result of looking closely, we should try to cultivate a sense of response. What does it mean? Once you've seen, now what are your obligations? To respond and to do and to speak. Looking more closely involves encouraging all generations to ask the difficult questions about what has occurred and why it has occurred. Now, I believe that when we look more closely at things, we deepen our humanity, and that can only help. So I, for example, a male living in the 21st century, benefit enormously when I read the novels of Jane Austen or George Eliot. These are women who lived in the 18th and 19th centuries. Understanding life from their perspective, that can only broaden my own. I loved reading Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns, in which she tracks the migration of 3 Black people from the South to the North. That expanded my horizons. It got me to look more closely at all manner of people and situations that I might not think about so much. We know that the Diary of Anne Frank has been read by millions of teens and adults of all backgrounds, and that it has forced them to look more closely. Schindler's List has been seen by people of all ages, of all backgrounds, and caused them to look more closely. Sometimes it is scary and it is disturbing to look closely. And I want to quote something that Spiegelman said, because he was reading that some of the people who were responsible for making the decision in Tennessee, they said that they found parts of his book distasteful. And so he said, you know what? Auschwitz was distasteful. And therefore, it is important for children, when they have the emotional maturity, of course, to come in contact even with that which is distasteful. And I want to say that as a Jew, I feel especially compelled to advocate for honest exploration, for deep understanding, and for looking more closely rather than turning away. It's embedded in our prayer. Ata chonen la'adam da'at. We say that every day. You give us, with your compassion, God, the capacity to discern and to understand. Tein b'libeinu lehavin ulehaskil. Plant within our hearts the capacity to understand and to comprehend. That is essential to the enterprise of being a human being. Through a Jewish lens, certainly. You don't look away. You want to look more closely. The Mishkan, the tabernacle that we're reading about right now, it was actually designed as a space that would encourage people to look more closely. If you're standing outside, you want to look inside where it's Kodesh. If you're standing where it's Kodesh, where it's holy, you want to look further inside, which is Kodesh HaKodashim. Wherever you are encouraged to look more closely ahead of you, and in so doing, to raise yourself up. And I have to say that because many have pointed out that the creation of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, has a resonance for the creation of the world, there is that scene that has been depicted in multiple religions through art, through literature of the first woman looking at that fruit, and the Torah tells us, Vater ha'isha kitov ha'etz lema'achal, that it looked like it was good to eat. Often this is interpreted as being the beginning of a fall. This was the disobedience that plunged us into a terrible space. That is not really the authentic Jewish way to look at that. It was regarded by many as being a description of life the way it is. The first woman was demonstrating the very, very human impulse to look more closely and to want to know. That is part of being a person. And I want to say to each of us, we are on this planet together. We know because things happen that require us to take note. And the question is, are we going to drown ourselves in a false sense of security by not looking? Or are we going to encourage across the lifespan a looking more closely, understanding that looking more closely leads to understanding, leads to a greater sense of Kedusha? I believe that the Jewish answer, which aligns with the human answer, is clear regarding our story, which others should know. And regarding others' stories, which we should know, we need to encourage people to look more closely. Shabbat Shalom.